Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Kyriba Global Summit 2020. This session is the future of integrated liquidity planning and forecasting, and I'm Sarah Pease from the marketing team here at Kyriba. This is a 30-minute listen-only session. Please submit any questions to us via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. And if we run out of time before we can answer all your questions, we'll be sure to follow up via email later this week. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce today's featured presenters, Yang Zhu from Kraft Heinz, and our very own Xavier Audebert, Vice President of Product Architecture from Kyriba. Yang Zhu is the Senior Vice President, Global Finance and Treasurer of Kraft Heinz, a $26 billion publicly listed global food company. Having worked in various roles across Treasury, M&A, strategy, finance, sales and marketing and operations in many different countries, Yang believes the best Treasury professionals drive value through business partnership and cross-functional acumen. And they differentiate themselves by defining and delivering the optimal capital structure of a company. Yang holds a master's degree of business administration from HEC School of Paris and London Business School, and she's a native of China. With that, I'll hand it over to Xavier to get started.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. And we'll start with emphasizing how much liquidity planning is key. Admitting at the same time that many corporates are looking for better solutions to manage it. Liquidity planning is key because corporates use it to assess liquidity in the short, medium, and long term, and under different assumptions. So ideally, companies would have a solution that gives them a continuous visibility over not only the mid-long term, like of course, the next 12 months and beyond, but as well liquidity information about the next weeks, next days, and obviously about the past, so that they can compare actuals to forecasts. Liquidity is key because the treasury teams have the role of transforming many things. And they have, for instance, to transform the budget into cash so that they can assess and anticipate the group's liquidity. If you anticipate, then you can optimize. You can optimize cash. Optimizing cash means you can prepare funding and investments in terms of timing, sizing, source of funds, evaluating counterparties. Anticipating means as well that you can detect, quantify exposures so you can hedge, for instance, the foreign exchange risk. Since we have a pleasure to have Yang with us today, I will turn to you, Yang, and ask you, could you tell us a little about how you manage liquidity planning and about strategic liquidity in your company?
Excellent. Thank you, Xavier, and thank you, Sarah, for having me. It's a distinctive pleasure for me to be able to speak to my fellow treasury professionals about liquidity. Obviously, we know liquidity is awfully important for any company, and I think during difficult times, it's even more so true. As we usually say that cash is king, and I say cash is even more of a king, a royal family, during very volatile times, because liquidity can drain pretty much very soon. And if we don't be extremely careful, we can really get into trouble for a company perspective. So that's why during those difficult times, you will see there's a distinguished difference between great companies who has been very predictive and being very cautious about the balance sheet management versus certain companies during difficult times for various reasons. If they don't have a very strong balance sheet, it's very difficult to sustain through cycles. And obviously, during difficult times, the treasury becomes the cornerstone and under the spotlight because we will be held accountable to strategically manage the liquidity on behalf of the company. So with that, maybe Xavier, let me share with some recent experience that I, within my company, Kraft Heinz, have been going through in order to manage liquidity during the COVID times. So you see many of the boxes here, but during those very interesting times and challenging times, every box has been fully opened and discussed and managed. So let me take a couple of examples here. So debt tower, we as a company and many companies are in a similar situation. The very first thing during the COVID peak, we worry about if we have enough cash to sustain our obligations. That includes, our obligations towards our employees, towards our debt obligations, towards our shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. And debt tower management becomes something critical. We took a very rapid look about the debt maturities in the next couple of years to say how much of the debt tower that we can organically manage with the cash on hand. And what we did is we actually conducted a series of transactions. We call them tender and refi. What essentially we did was issue new debt that is a long-term horizon and push the near-term debt. So that in the near term, whenever the debt matures, we always have extremely high confidence level that we can pay back those debts no matter what. And we also, obviously, when you look at liquidity, it's very difficult to pass over cash on hand and revolver. So during that time, we also took a look at revolver. I know many companies has also are in a position that they have to renegotiate the covenants. We didn't have to because our covenants has been in a position that we could manage through. But we also extend the revolver because we want to make sure whatever liquidity that we have with our strategic banking partners, we can preserve those liquidity just for rainy days. And we also put in additional liquidity, working capital-wise, and pull the triggers, repatriation, et cetera, et cetera. And we also, Xavier, earlier on, you have one box that you mentioned is hedge. I think it's important for us as a fellow treasurers to take a look at times, margin calls or mark-to-market, credit counter risk, those things in the derivatives area. So to make sure that at any time we know what potentially could be the liquidity drain or potentially can monetize certain liquidities. So with that, maybe let me go back to some reflection, having gone through the Great Recession and recent COVID. It has been important for my company so that we always look at the capital structure in a very strategic perspective. We know at all times what are the strategic priorities in order to deploy our cash. So we do know when the cash is at a stake or cash is a premium, what are the levers we could pull? That is, we always say we need to preserve what we need to invest in our business, to preserve the obligation we have to fulfill, preserve certain obligation that we have towards deleveraging and shareholders. So once you have such priorities, you always know which levers you can pull when you do need to. But I think it's really important for us as fellow treasurers to have such dialogues with the board of directors, with our executive teams, so that we always know at all times, so we are not scrambling in the 11th hour. The second thing I think is important to highlight is very prudent liability management. So earlier I kind of talked about the debt, but it's the same importance for us to look at off-balance sheet liabilities, such as pension, such as post-retirement medicals, etc. Because sometimes when cash is a crunch, it can also be that the market is turning against you. Therefore, certain times if you don't have a very strong balance sheet, including those areas, it could be find yourself in a situation where you have to have a lot of cash for your pension funding, for example, or for post-retirement. So for us, fortunately at Kraft Heinz, we have overfunded pension and pre-funded post-retirement. But I think it's very important for us during good times when you do have the cash to continuously fund those areas so that we don't find holes and when the liquidity crunch does come. And the third one is key stakeholder management. I think during difficult times, you often see there's a lot of dialogue that has to happen with the rating agencies, with your bondholders, and also with your banking partners. Because at those times, you will see if you do need cash, are they there for you? And if they are there for you, what are the consistent transparency dialogues that has to happen, during the good years? So those are the continuous dialogue. I think it's a very conscious investment of time and investment of your capital so that you're always wary if certain things happen down the horizon that you know how to manage through, and you have banking partners and you have your bond investors that will be behind you. The last thing I think is also coming back to Xavier's earlier point, it's managing real-time liquidity to the extent that they manage that in a way that is speak to excellence become very, very important. Because during these times, You can either have a lot of cash on the balance sheet that doesn't return much, or you can see I have very clear visibility of my near-term liquidity. Therefore, I know where to invest. I'm not sitting with idle cash, and I also have sufficient buffer. So during my peak and valleys in terms of working capital funding, I know at all times where I can find liquidity and how to fund the liquidity. So I think those are very important aspects for me, and have been, personally going through such interesting times. And I think some of the experience I can personally share with my fellow treasury professionals. So with that, I turn back to you, Xavier.
Thanks a lot, Yang. So liquidity excellence, liquidity visibility, key, but we say that's often a challenge for companies. Because when we talk to our clients, we hear, I do not have a reliable liquidity planning, or I need to rekey too many data, or my reporting is too static, so I cannot test different assumptions. And the reason being that liquidity planning is a reporting that requires to combine multiple data sources without, of course, duplicating data, making them overlap. And over a personalized horizon, like each company will have a different definition of time buckets, for instance. So let's look at the data requirements to better understand the challenge. You need data from the balance sheet, from the general ledger. So we see that on the left. You need data from your budget. You need data from your financial transactions, like the outstanding debt and principal repayments. So that you can calculate KPIs, liquidity KPIs, net cash, cash, and cash equivalent. And to do so, and again, depending on how you want the time periods to be defined, you will need to gather a lot of data. You will need to get, for instance, end of day statements for the past, or paid and reconciled APs and ARs, the intraday statements to get the position as of today, and all the forecasts imported from ERPs, HR, often aggregated, like multiple invoices, aggregated per due date. Instead of these aggregates, you may prefer to use individual APs and ARs, and even extend to POs, customer orders, if you want to extend the horizon of the available forecasts. From the budget, we're talking about the transformation before of a budget into liquidity forecast. You need to get these forecasts from all of the entities, adding, if not already a part of the forecast, the FX exposures. And as well, of course, the schedule of debt, investment, principal, interest repayments, FX gain and loss. So that's a lot of information to gather. And to get perfect APIs, you also need to include outstanding debt and investment, available credit lines, overdraft. So that's a lot. That's a lot. And Yang, does that resonate with you, that challenge of collecting all that information?
Indeed, because it touches every single area of any company's business, right? So we have constantly have the dialogue with our process partners to be able to find the information and make sure the information doesn't have holes, doesn't have duplications. And then you combine, you put in the visible way, then you analyze them. And each of the steps actually can be painful.
Thanks a lot. And so that's a clear challenge. So how can we help clients? How can we, as Kyriba, solve it? So let's look at it with two parts. So part number one is making all the required data available. So where are the required data for liquidity planning? The good news is that most of them are available in Kyriba already across the Kyriba's product lines. And we'll see the details in the next slide. And the other good news being that other required data will be added to Kyriba soon per our 2021 roadmap. So let's look at details. So the same presentation as before, some more colors. So you see in green, the data that are available in Kyriba already. End of day, intraday statements, aggregated forecast, schedule of debt, investment, FX, etc. And in purple, we have the data that are not yet available. It will be available, in 2021. So it deals with individual APARs first. Actually, many customers do already import individual APARs in Kyriba, but we want to make it easier for all of the companies to access that granular, detailed information in Kyriba. Why? Because you can get better forecasts. The more thin, the richer the information, the better the forecast. The other place where we want to make it easier for the customers is to input the mid to long-term forecasts. So how will we do that? Let's look at the data sources that Kyriba will add in 2021. First, secure plug-and-play ERP connectors. It means an easy, nearly automated connection into the ERPs so that we can easily read and extract the individual AP, AR invoices, the POs to feed forecasts and simulations for the main ERPs, and we'll extend the coverage of ERPs over time. Point number two is, I was saying in the previous slide, making it easier for your teams to input the liquidity forecast mid-long term with a nice grid to capture the information or import and workflows for these mid-long-term cash forecasts by company and budget category. Like, you will no longer need to create dummy bank accounts and dummy flow codes. It will be much more easier and smooth to enter this forecast. And the third point, which is about AI, because we are using AI already at Kyriba in our fraud detection solution, meaning in the payment factory solution, when payments are entered, imported, modified, they get screened automatically through machine learning so that we can detect automatically any suspicious transaction by scoring each payment against the history of the previous payments using multiple dimensions: amount, timing, beneficiary, country, etc. And we will extend AI to many other domains, mostly in forecasting, starting with enhanced collection forecasts, because we know it's often a weakness, the accuracy of when your clients will pay you. And we conducted a set of very successful POCs with clients, and we'll bring that into the application early next year. And then we'll extend to other forecasting use cases. So these are the main data liquidity sources that we'll add in 2021. So how can Kyriba solve the challenge? We saw part one, it's by bringing more data. And then two, it's by leveraging this data. How? By launching a new solution for integrated liquidity planning in H2 2021. So integrated meaning better integration with ERPs. Integrated means as well better usage of all the data that are available or will be added to the Kyriba product lines and modules and workflows. And it's also a better integration of AI model into the forecasting. So how will it look like? So summary, first, so a multi-source liquidity planning solution, of course, leveraging all the data that you have in Kyriba with simulations, so with what-if scenarios augmented by AI. And we already gave an example where AI creates value by making the collection forecast more accurate. It means that you will have a very flexible solution to select what data sources to use for each budget category and period. You may say, for instance, that for the current month, you want to use your forecast coming from the cash position worksheet. For the next month, it would be a forecast coming from a liquidity plan that you could version, saying, oh, I want to use the last version of the last three forecasts, for instance. Using the new entry grid for cash budget and reforecasts with a process that's very close and natural to meet the usual FP&A routine in terms of initial budgeting, weekly, monthly reforecasting, so that you can typically have that continuous of data, short, mid, long term, with a cash position, the reforecast, and the budget. And simulations, with the ability to configure simulation scenarios that Kyriba will apply to all the selected data sources, not to single data sources, but across the board to make the analysis and liquidity plan very, very consistent. And a lot of flexibility to apply it to currency rates, interest rates, payment terms, or you could select that, for instance, 20% of the customers or the BU may start paying late by 20 days, for instance. Result, having an integrated liquidity planning solution as a report that will leverage all the data and that will easily test all the different assumptions that you want to include. So our product and engineering team are working very actively on this project, and we'll be happy to share more news about it very, very soon. Thank you. And Sarah, turning back to you to check what questions we received during the presentation.
Yes, thank you both so much. We do have questions. The first one actually, this one actually goes to Xavier. Question is, can you tell us more about the plug and play ERP connectors?
Okay, so on a technical point of view, it means that Kyriba will be using the APIs in ERPs to connect ERPs. So the terms plug and play means that the IT teams of our customers will have to do nothing or low integration effort to make the data available to forecasting models in Kyriba. So of course, we have to make, and we made most of the development already in terms of secure authentication and identification what data makes sense, when do they change, so that we can propagate all of these changes very quickly to the Kyriba solution. But the speed of integration is only one of the benefits. The main benefit is to get better forecasts. How? It's first to get better data, like more granular information at the invoice level, for instance, richer information. For each invoice, it's also getting the accounting date, the customer info, the analytical dimensions, cost and term business units, and more frequent updates. And why do you then? It's, let's say, for instance, that if you only got due dates, if you don't get the accounting date, if you don't have a payment term, then you cannot assess the impact of a change in payment terms on your cash position. It's also because if you have very granular information, then you can use AI optimally. We conducted very successful POCs as well with customers that show that the more detailed information you inject into the AI models, the better the results. That's why plug and play ERP connectors will matter that much, so that you can very easily get your individual information, invoices, POs in Kyriba to feed AI and to get optimal forecasts.
Okay. Thank you so much. The next question, changing gears just a little bit. Yang, how has COVID-19 changed the role of Treasury? How has COVID-19 changed the role of Treasury? Yang?
It's actually a good question. I'm just reflecting upon, like any role, right? There's always different facets, and there's a facet of functions of a role. And I think for Treasury, through good times, there are two roles that's a very heightened. One is operational role. How do we manage the day-to-day and manage the day-to-day very well? Cash management, FX management, pension management, insurance, whatnot. And there are certain times when you have a major transaction like debt refinancing, becomes transaction leaders. That's a second facet. What I think it heightened during COVID-19 are probably two things that speaks to me more personally. The writing against the occasion, I would say. One is become a strategic advisor. Just because debt, liquidity, capital allocation is so front-centered. I mean, it is a strategic conversation that goes all the way to the CEO, CFO, goes all the way to the board of directors of how should we prioritize our capital allocation? How much capital do we have? How should we prioritize them? And why, right? And I think those kind of conversations set a treasury function as the strategic advisors, because there's a mathematical lens, there's a strategical lens, there's a business constraints and what different phases of a company is. So taking all this into consideration and articulate in a way that is simple and yet to the point and also be prudent, it's an art. So for me, the third facet, strategic advisor, is probably much more heightened during and post COVID-19. There's another facet of the role is probably problem solver, right? So once we realize that you do need to preserve liquidity, and that has been more exposed during the peak of COVID-19, and later it's proven out to be that the market is still there quite favorably for liquidity. However, during the peak of COVID-19, I think problem solver in terms of when you get the question, the Treasury often get the question, do I have enough money to sustain my working capital? If I don't, should I cut capex? Should I issue a new debt? Should I tap into the revolver? So you become a problem solver. You say, well, this is a problem that we see, or this potentially can be an issue, and let's be proactive on how to solve those questions. So problem solver for me is more so a heightened profile in Treasury during this time. But I would say through cycle, I think, a Treasury function or strategic Treasury function is we always need to be worried about, is the balance sheet strong enough through cycles? Sometimes it's really good, and the balance sheet can be in a way a little bit lazy, but always be worried that what can happen and what can turn badly. And already in good times, you put the balance sheet in a very strong way. So therefore, we're not scrambling at the 11th hour. I think it's always a good role a Treasury can and should be playing. Hope that answers the question, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yang. We do have time for one more question. This one is for Xavier. Can you tell us more about the workflow that will be available in the future for entering mid and long-term cash forecasts? The workflow.
Yes, of course. Yeah, great question. What we see when we talk with clients is that one of the big challenges is to coordinate the effort of the different entities to collect the information. All the more so when you have to repeat it on a monthly basis, for instance, anytime there's some reforecasting exercise put in place. So it's where workflow will help, so that notifications can be triggered automatically when reaching some specific stages, when getting automatic alerts when some data imports fail, and to also enforce review and approvals, like approval workflows with explicit review and local or central approvals of submitted data, so that everybody has full visibility as to where we stand, are the data complete and usable to present the information to the CFO, for instance. And over time, we'll extend workflows to other activities, such as, for instance, the analysis, explanation of comments to support the dialogue and the accountability in the company. This is it.
Very good. Okay, well, looks like we are at the end of our time for this session. If you in the audience have any outstanding questions, please send those to activeliquidity@Kyriba.com. A very big thank you to Yang Zhu from Kraft Heinz for her time and contributions to today's session, and of course to Xavier.